Today at the National Press Club, mining magnate turned business and philanthropic leader Andrew Forrest. Dr Forrest will argue shifting from fossil fuels to renewable energy is a pivotal chance to ensure economic prosperity. Andrew Forrest with today's National Press Club address.
Hello and welcome to the National Press Club of Australia for today's Westpac address. My name is David Crowe, the Chief Political Correspondent at the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age and a Director here at the Club. Our guest today is Andrew Forrest, the Executive Chairman of Fortescue, one of Australia's biggest mining groups. He's probably known to many as one of the country's wealthiest investors, also the new owner of Cooper Hats. But he is also the Chairman of Tatarang, a private company that owns Squadron Energy, one of the biggest investors in renewable power in this country. That makes him a significant voice in one of the most important debates in national affairs today. How do we manage the energy transition? Can we achieve net zero emissions? And what does that mean for Australian manufacturing and for jobs? And for good measure, Mr Forrest is also a co-founder of the Minderoo Foundation, a not-for-profit that he set up with Nicola Forrest. Minderoo has made many funding commitments, but one of them is to humanitarian aid that helps the people of Ukraine. And that work continues 2 years after the Russian invasion. And I should mention that it's great to have the Ambassador of Ukraine, Vasyl Miroshnichenko, here with us today. Also, the US Ambassador to Australia, Carolyn Kennedy. Great to have you here. We'll also be hearing from the Ukrainian ambassador at the club on Wednesday. So in other words, there's a lot to hear about and a lot to ask about at today's address. For those of you watching at home, you can join the conversation on Twitter or X, where our handle is @PressClubAust, or you can use the hashtag NPC. Please welcome Andrew Forrest to the podium.
So look, thank you all very much for coming, and I'd like to acknowledge all the members of our Foreign Diplomatic Corps here today. May I make special mention of my close friend who is with us, Ukraine's ambassador, who's already been acknowledged, Ambassador Miroshnichenko. So I'm going to get there in the end, mate. And Friday marks 2 years since the Russian invasion. And as the war ticks into the third year, we must not let our support for Ukraine wane. We must not reward tyranny and borders being taken by force. The hideous signal of dropping the rules-based order established at the huge cost of World War II cannot be allowed. So, Ambassador, thank you for all you do for Ukraine and for what you do for the world. But let me talk about Australia's own battle between old and new ideas, where those who will inherit our country are being ignored by the short-sightedness of those who cannot accept that even the fossil fuel industry has taken responsibility for the global warming we're all beginning to suffer. Let's face it, not changing is not an option. Green energy is the lowest cost energy in any Australian home. We've just got to face into that. We do nothing apart from having more expensive energy than the rest of the world, and change will be forced on us when it is too late for Australia to benefit from its immense opportunities. Or we take the lead now from the most obvious economic signals I've seen in my entire life and improve the lives of every Australian. Let's take my dad's life, which spanned the Great Depression, World War II, and half a century of managing Minderoo, a cattle station in the far north of Australia. Just before he died last September, my father said, "There are problems in the world. You shouldn't worry about it, but if you can do something about it, do it. Get on with it. Don't spend your time worrying about it." He knew, like I do, that climate change is the single greatest threat facing Australia, but also that we can all benefit from solving it if we just get on with it. It's time to stop bickering and whinging and causing division. Back in the day, my father lost our beloved Minderoo station to drought when almost 51 degrees Celsius was being recorded in the area. It was bad then, and it's worse now. The old-timers tell me that we're just in one long drought, but this time, none of the old fellas are predicting when the seasonal rains will return. As you can tell, I'm an ex-jackaroo, a bloke from the bush, and proud of it. We grew up with a political party which bound us together. And I ask those who claim to represent the bush now to stop dividing us with the false hope that we can cling to fossil fuels forever. We can't, so please stop betraying the bush. If we swallow this new lie that we should stop the rollout of green energy and that nuclear energy will be our fairy godmother, we will be worse off again. I do know how to do projects. I do know the science. And I do know the economics. This misinformed, unscientific, uneconomic, plucked out of the air, thin air, bull dust of nuclear policies of politicians masquerading as leaders helps no one. Politicians who do whatever they can to scurry and scare up votes are just politicians. They are not political leaders. That's the difference between the two. One gets elected due to a genuine care for the community, and the other creates division and criticism just to attract attention at the ballot box. A leader will remind the farming community of mine that global warming is real and that all their customers are taking it very seriously, that their sheep spend more hours peacefully grazing where there are solar panels due to the protection from the sun, wind and rain they provide than those on the open plains. And instead of knocking a slow-moving, gracious wind tower, try a nuclear power plant or a belching coal plant next door. The fact that we can feel climate change already, despite the ocean soaking up most of our heat-generated emissions, means Australia has finally run out of time. We get the next few years wrong, and Australia's economy and the rest of us cook. We get it right, and Australia enjoys decades of economic growth, full employment, and the reinvigoration of its natural environment. As Professors Rod Sims and Ross Grant said earlier this month, we can circuit break the cost of living crisis, turn around unemployment and play our full part in decarbonising at least to 6% of global emissions through new green export industries. But we're at a point in history where we need big thinking leadership. We need a power shift from a fossil fuel dependent economy run by despots from overseas to an economy which is ours, made here, renewable energy-led economy by Australians for Australians. If we make the right decisions today, if we deliver the most profound and enduring economic growth that I've ever seen, particularly in regional Australia, then we will have no time left for the bombastic hyperbole which threads into this debate. Let me be specific, economically specific. In terms of assets and profitability, Saudi Aramco is one of the biggest consistently in the world, in the world's most profitable industry in modern economic history. This is the same company which at COP28 only a couple of months ago had the bell toll on it when the world agreed to transition away from fossil fuels and that fossil fuels were responsible for climate change. I have never seen clearer economic signals in my life. Australia can generate not one but many of its own Australian Aramcos with the right policy settings. We can achieve all this through three simple policies. These are the shortcuts to growing huge Australian contributors. First, I propose a Best for Australia test which explicitly considers climate impacts when approving new major projects. Every project up for government approval must have a climate trigger. That means we must take the climate change and carbon pollution impact into account in any project approval. It will be seen as asinine if we don't. It's long overdue that we do. It's a simple and reasonable government requirement that carbon emissions and global warming automatically be part of any environmental assessment. Energy companies who will quickly pivot, they don't have to now, will quickly pivot to green energy to meet their contracts. A similar policy is being considered in the United States, where President Biden has paused LNG export projects pending assessment of their impacts on climate change and other matters of national security. It's about time. Forward-thinking climate strategy and policymakers like our friend Ambassador Caroline Kennedy, welcome Caroline, and your husband, are the reason why Fortescue has chosen the USA, not Australia, as the site of our first major project, a liquid green hydrogen project facility in Phoenix, Arizona. Policy matters for business, and right now, Australia's lethargic adherence to fossil fuel is failing its business leaders, who want to do their full part in stopping global warming. We all want to drive this, but policy settings are stacked against us. My second call is to lean into the lowest cost energy solution, firmed renewables, and build them faster. The Australian Energy Market Operator, AMO, and the CSIRO, I think one of the world's best, most reliable scientific organisations, have repeatedly found that wind and solar firmed with pumped hydro, battery and gas are the lowest cost electricity solution, full stop, period. This is what will bring household bills down for Australian mums and dads and all of us. The status quo will only make things worse, and by that I mean the fossil fuel status quo they're struggling to maintain. Doing nothing is not okay. If we continue to rely on ageing coal-fired power stations, which are on the brink of breakdown, it locks us into rising energy bills for years. This will also save industry. Solar and wind energy costs have been in decline now for 20 years. Fossil fuels have done the opposite. And even France, the ambassador from France here, and great to see you, acknowledges that the cost of its nuclear energy systems grows year by year. As Einstein observed, we won't get a different result by wishing for it and doing it the same way. We need more renewables, not fewer renewables, and much less fossil fuels. By way of example, Rio Tinto recently announced a historic 25-year green energy contract to supply energy to its Gladstone aluminium operations. Rio is a very astute company, and it's doing its best to save regional employment in Queensland, knowing that continued reliance on fossil fuels will risk massive shutdowns and huge unemployment. And we can't let that happen through short-sightedness. My third policy is, as Rod and Ross Carbon Solutions Levy stated clearly, it's not enough to shift the rich, lethargic and imagination-poor fossil fuel industry from lobbying and saddling our economy, destroying our country. These companies, these fossil fuel companies, pay almost no tax. They concentrate enormous profits, mostly offshore, and they're standing in the road of Australia's opportunity to become that fabled green energy massive global contributor. Their heavy-handed front-page advertising talks about all the tax they hope to pay in the future, unapologetic that their track record says the complete opposite. In fact, Australia's hard-working teachers, nurses and retail workers pay more income tax and GST than the tax paid by the entire fossil fuel industry, according to the Australia Institute. In 2021, Chevron paid just $30. That's not $3 billion or even $300 million in tax. That's $30, despite making $12.5 billion from Australia's resources. In contrast, Fortescue paid $5.5 billion in corporate taxes and state government royalties in 2023, making us the third highest ranking company in Australia in terms of tax paid. When we, as a nation, and the world at large are crying out for green energy, why are we giving fossil fuel industry a free ride and forcing energy consumers everywhere to only consume fossil fuels? Simple. the multi-decadal polluting companies have exploited vicious lobbying for approvals so they can crowd out green energy, so they can prevent Australians from having the choice between cheaper green energy, which won't destroy their livelihoods and them, and more expensive fossil fuels, which will. In 2022-23, Australia spent over $11 billion supporting the fossil fuel industry. Well, let's tick that into $21,000 a minute, speeding our own demise. We're playing mums and dads' precious tax dollars into huge companies' coffers while funding corporate climate denialists who plainly don't give a damn about anyone's future, let alone our kids. Massive taxpayer-funded financial support for huge mining companies like Fortescue to use imported diesel, read imported, not made here, imported from overseas, is indefensible. With lobby groups while their lobby groups quickly hide behind the Australian farmer, the cocky, to defend the diesel fuel rebate, they know that the vast proportion of the money goes to big mining and fossil fuel companies, not Australia's farmers nor fishermen. The ridiculousness of the rich crying out for more fossil fuel subsidies while denying climate change will surely go down as one of the most perversely selfish behaviours in Australian history. The carbon solutions levy that Rod Sims and Ross Garner have proposed would be a levy on every tonne of carbon extracted underground in Australia or imported into Australia. This would act like the tobacco tax in Australia already has. At the time that tobacco tax was gutsy policy, that was accused of business interference, saddling consumers with unnecessary costs, and an industry that roundly proclaimed that smoking wasn't bad for your health. Well, that worked out well, didn't it? It would have to sound horribly familiar, particularly to those dinosaurs who are still denying we should do anything about the energy transition, or worse, the real reason nuclear keeps being put on the table so they don't have to do anything for 20 years. Australia now proudly has one of the highest tobacco taxes in the world, with around $26 out of every $40 pack of cigarettes going back into the public purse. This levy discourages smoking. It works and covers some of the enormous cost smoking inflicts on our healthcare system. The tobacco lobby initially paid doctors to say smoking is good for you. That got hard, then it slipped back to saying it's not bad for you, with all their massive campaign dollars harvested from killing people. Might sound familiar here, fossil fuel sector, to finally admitting it's deadly and should rightly be taxed out of existence. Why are fossil fuels any different? For the first 27 years of the Conference of the Parties, or COP, which was solely established to address climate change and move the world on from fossil fuel, the fossil fuels lobbied aggressively against any form of restrictions or any form of recognition of their responsibility for climate change. They swamped COP with expensive lobbyists and campaigns, and so the voices of scientific reason were drowned out. They denied their culpability so they could continue their expansions, handicapping the nascent green energy and green electricity industries, which could have and should have taken hold decades ago. The green industries that could prevent the global warming we're now beginning to suffer were nobbled, while the fossil fuel sector removed any wording that made them culpable for it. Only after immense pressure and evidence made obvious from deaths, devastation and hardship all over the world did COP28, 28 years later, formally acknowledge fossil fuels' responsibility and the obvious need to transition away. When viewed from this angle, $100 billion a year levy on the fossil fuels that are already destroying our climate, going to our farmers and citizens who have to suffer its worst effects, looks to me about right. To put it in context, Australia's property market alone is expected to lose over $570 billion in value by 2030 due to climate change. Like the tobacco industry, It's high time that the industry that causes global warming contributes to alleviating its harm for all our countrymen and women. That $100 billion a year could be invested straight back into communities to reduce the cost of energy, an estimated $500 off every Australian's energy bill and 30 cents a litre less at the pump, the Superpower Institute estimates. We can invest that funding directly where it's needed most, in our farmers, in reducing unemployment and crime, in hospitals and our education system. It could also fund Australia's green energy transition. So let's be clear, for the sake of the visionless, a carbon solutions levy is not a carbon tax. Carbon tax are generally applied wherever emissions occur in the economy, so at the cement factory or the petrol pump. But the carbon solutions levy would only be applied to the 100-odd fossil fuel extraction sites in Australia and to importers who are stopping us making our own energy. The beauty of this levy is that it does not penalise everyday Australians. It only penalises the perpetrators of this crisis, the fossil fuel industry. Some are saying this levy would put fossil fuel workers out of a job. Think of the tobacco example, team. But that's a plain untruth as well. Existing gas projects will continue to operate. They'll just have to pay the levy. They'll just have to pay their way. That'll be new. These jobs will stay and be multiplied by the green energy sector that fossil fuels have fought so hard to stop getting off the ground. Yes, new oil and gas projects will be harder to get up. Thank God. Australia has never been a country to crow about its achievements, but we've done a record job of rolling out solar. In fact, this summer, our rooftop solar dwarfed the whole gas and coal we used. It's just fair and democratic transition of Australian families, driven by Australian families, collectively owning and generating more energy than any Australian corporation. So let me tell you what's not just and not fair. This remarkable claim by the fossil fuel sector that they are essential to global energy security or our quality of life, that is a lie. For the first time in decades, in 2022, the number of people around the world without access to electricity increased to 760 million. The number of people who can't feed themselves, or those kids who can't do their homework after dark because there's just no energy, is rising, not falling. Imagine what an Australia-sized rooftop solar boom would do for some of these countries, which have been failed for generations by the fossil fuel sector, which is anything but just and fair. Let's have the fossil fuel sector move over. You are proved to fail. You're proved unjust and unfair. Just refer to Putin if you want any more evidence. At the end of the day, the question for Australians is not if or why to price carbon. It is whether or not we allow the price to be set by Australia, by Australians, to the profit of Australians, or by global markets. It's going to happen regardless. You can't deny it, it's happening now. In 2026, the EU will impose a carbon border tax on all products, a major export market for Australia, including Australian products made from using fossil fuel, a tax on the carbon they emit or contain. If we have a carbon price or levy, we won't pay that tax overseas, wasted. It will stay in Australia. As more and more countries bring carbon border taxes online, more and more doors will close on Australia's exports if we don't get moving. This is a fact. The diplomatic corps already know this, so I wish to thank the ambassadors and high commissioners from across the world that have kindly attended today, where Fortescue and the Minderoo Foundation is working. In particular, Ukraine, the UK, the US, Egypt, Canada, Morocco, France, Brazil, China, Argentina, Netherlands and Peru and India, who are all represented here today. I thank you. These are the three policies Australia needs to create its own Australian Aramcos and drive the green investment we so badly need. Australia should be accelerating its investment in green energy, like our peers globally, but instead investment dropped 35% last year. China, for example, built 300 gigawatts of green energy and only 1.5 gigawatts of nuclear. I wonder why. Let's face it, while we delay, obfuscate and quarrel, we're getting smoked. Politicians peddling fairy godmothers and divisions between our communities just to raise ballot box attention are coming at a real cost to Australia. Expanding green energy brings down costs. Solar and wind energy costs have been declined now for 20 years, and regional Australia benefits. A supercharged green economy will bring many other direct benefits to regional Australia. More jobs, cheaper energy, more opportunities. Without the politics, regional Australia can work through the green transition because it stands to benefit the most. Not just the workers on each green project, but the entire region surrounding its small businesses, traders and truckies. Squadron already has 1.1 gigawatts in operation, powering 1.35 million homes, and another gigawatt being constructed right now in Queensland and New South Wales. We've committed to building 14 gigawatts of firmed renewables by the 2030s throughout Australia's regions, enough to replace 2/3 of the capacity of Australia's coal-fired power stations and power 6 million homes. Just last month, we started construction on Squadron's Yungala 440 megawatt project in central western New South Wales. That project was successful because it has widespread support from the local community. We need to replicate that over and over, sharing the benefits of the green boom across the bush. Green energy will protect all jobs, and it's not just creating new jobs, it's protecting those that exist now. Green energy means steel and aluminium workers and any other workers in existing manufacturing industries have long-term job security. With the right policy settings and innovation support, we can make competitive technologies such as batteries, green iron and green steel right here in Australia. Fortescue is already making electrolysers in Gladstone at our 2 gigawatt factory and working to turn Queensland Coal City into a global green industrial hub to protect Australian workers. Unlike coal, which is concentrated in just a few regions and will shut down Gladstone, will shut down the huge aluminium industry we have if we don't move to green energy, renewable projects can be distributed across a far greater area and bring economic benefit to far more communities. It makes me wonder why it is often MPs from these very regions who are grasping for talking points, who are inadvertently standing in the road of the local economic growth that will benefit the regions most. They push nuclear knowing it would just keep expensive and unreliable fossil fuel going for another 20 years, as opposed to green energy that is delivering jobs, infrastructure investment and sustainable growth for their constituents. It brings me back to leadership and calling out politicians who create division and misinformation while criticising good policy because they'll get a vote from someone who hasn't made up their mind. One key piece of information is that Australian farmers will have to give up all their land to enable the green energy transition. That's not true either. I stand with farmers and I stand with the National Party in prioritising the protection of prime agricultural land, noting that only 0.5% of Australia's landmass will enable the environmental sustainability and all the growth economic opportunities I speak of. We must fairly compensate farmers, that's for sure. And even when transition lines across their land, we've been doing this for decades, but we've got to ramp it up. Not just through lease payments for wind farms, but the most drought-resilient crop a farmer can have, but in also through community initiatives, compensating people for green transmission lines and high-speed internet in places that have no cell reception, through housing and support for community organisations. Squadron does it. We'd like the government to join us. Today I'm announcing that Squadron will lead an industry-wide fund to cover the future decommissioning costs, listening to the many landholders we engage with. Not every wind farm will be decommissioned. Many will be extended or repowered. So that landowners have peace of mind, we have to do this. The government must regulate renewable companies so they are held responsible for putting money aside for decommissioning, and we applaud the proposed rating systems to rule out cowboy developers. If there's an issue, let's discuss it and figure out the solution. Let's not just argue and bicker with ideology. As my father said, stop the squabbling and misinformation. Let's just get on with it. On misinformation, let me directly address nuclear energy. I'm agnostic, but I've done the numbers. Unlike many of the fear-spreading politicians, who's going to pay their nuclear electricity bill when it's 4 to 5 times more expensive than the renewables next door? Even ignoring the decade or two plus it takes to develop nuclear. And how hopeless is it that a politician says they want to wait for new technology in 20 years' time? That may never happen. It's just an excuse for doing nothing. This is a straight admission that fossil fuels have to go, but their solutions risk leaving us destitute. With wind and solar, you're up and running, lowering energy costs and eliminating pollution within 1 to 3 years. We're doing it today. We're proof. Small and declining amounts of natural gas sourced from existing, not new, developments can act as firming power as Australia massively ramps up green hydrogen. But as soon as there's a replacement, we must go for it, because it's not gas in the long term. Imagine, please, economic growth over generations. Imagine, please, full employment over generations. Imagine returning the environment to the pristine nature it was before fossil fuels came along. Imagine cheap energy being produced everywhere in our country, and that no despotic regimes can start wars with it. Imagine a prosperous, economically and environmentally strong Australia. If you can imagine this, then the only resource we are lacking is the courage to just get on and do it. As my dad said, let's just get on with it. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. There was a lot covered there, and we've got our journalists here ready to ask questions, but I'll kick off with the first one. You've made it clear that you want a climate trigger in environmental law. That's one thing the federal government can do. You also back the idea of the carbon solutions levy as advanced here at the club by Rod Simmons and Ross Garnaut. But we do have this sort of immediate debate about wind power, about solar power, about the use of that across the country. Are you seeking any other help from the federal government to get that moving at bigger scale? Are you looking for any subsidy from the federal government to make this happen? Or any subsidy for manufacturing, for it to use this green energy for green manufacturing? Do you think the government needs to spend more money, in other words?
Yeah, look, I think that's a great question. Thank you for the clarification. The main thing the green electricity and green energy industry needs, ladies and gentlemen, is for the fossil fuel sector to stop lobbying governments to stand in the road. If you think that nuclear came out of nowhere, no, it didn't. It's been pushed by the fossil fuel sector as a great way to delay the whole country for 20 years from switching over to cheaper energy. So the first thing we need is government help to get the fossil fuel sector straight out of our road and to stop peddling this masquerading rubbish that nuclear is somehow a solution when we know it takes 10 to 20 years to get into place and we know it's 4 to 5 times more expensive. So if the government wants to speed it up even further, yes, it works really well if you give subsidies. The diesel fuel rebate is one massive subsidy that's locked in us having to send Australian hard-earned dollars overseas when we could have been making all that energy in Australia with Australian workers, Australian companies paying Australian tax. So it's really up to the government. But my call is to help us get the fossil fuel boot off Australia's neck so we can just get on with it.
Next question is from Andrew Probyn.
Dr Forrest, Andrew Probyn from the Nine Network. One of the key ingredients to the clean energy revolution will be nickel. There are tens of thousands of Australian jobs that are based on the nickel industry, but they're in peril because China has invested heavily in much cheaper but much dirtier nickel in Indonesia. How can Australia compete in this sector when the bottom line is often, and more often than not, more important than the environmental bottom line with regards to nickel? And did this come up at the security talks in Munich?
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Let me tell you about the bottom line. Angela Merkel worried about the bottom line and got all her energy from a despotic Russia. How did that work out for Germany? Cost them trillions in the end. Massive losses to every German citizen. A disaster. Now, if we can't learn from history, we're going to repeat it, right? So if you do not care about environmental sustainability, if you don't care that whole rainforests are getting destroyed over in Indonesia, if you don't care that the wastes are being dumped into the ocean with no longitudinal environmental surveys about what that will do to marine life, before it happened, we can see its results right now. It's destroying it. Communities which have been there for hundreds of years are having to move because they cannot sustain themselves anymore. If we don't care about environmental standards, if we don't care about human rights, if we don't care about sourcing our products from green energy, then don't whinge in a few years' time when you're paying much more for your product and you've gone back to single sources of supply and you've repeated Angela Merkel's mistake. If you want diversified supply chains, then you'll back the environment, you'll back human rights, and you'll back green energy.
Yeah, but can you answer the question, though? How do you get people to care? How do you get Elon Musk to care about where he's sourcing his nickel?
Simple. The customers are hearing the truth that Elon Musk batteries, if they're being sourced from Indonesia, are destroying rainforests, are destroying marine environments, are running only on dirty coal. How's your green energy argument going, Elon? And propagating the fossil fuel sector. So when they start to vote with their checkbook, then people like Elon Musk really listen.
Next question is from Rosie Lewis.
Rosie Lewis from The Australian. I wanted to ask you about the conga line of high-profile executive exits from Fortescue and your private company in the last year. How do you explain that high turnover? Guy Debelle and who's another? Michael Gunner as two examples.
Okay, Guy and Michael are still great friends of ours. Guy helped me with the speech. I don't believe we have a conga line, as you dramatically point out. I mean, we employ 22,000 people. When you go from a fossil fuel burning company to a green energy company, you're going to lose people who say, what are you doing? You've got this fantastic economic model. You're the most successful company, shareholder returns in decades in our country. Why are you fiddling around with it? And the reason is we want to continue that track record. We're not happy just sitting on our laurels with what we've achieved already. So lots of people think that's not for them, and I think that's completely fine. But when you look at, say, Fortescue to, say, the mining industry per se, we're running at about half the turnover of the mining industry at Fortescue. You look at the board of directors, they're long-term. You look at the senior management, we're changing it up all the time. Change is necessary if you're going to improve. You cannot improve without change.
So on that note, a high turnover should be noted in the future as well?
I think we're settling it down now. I mean, I think that Dino, Shelley and Hutch are a really great team. They're working super well together. They're driving our green energy transformation as well as keeping up record production and profits. So I'm really comfortable with them.
Next question is from Phil Curry.
Thanks, David. Thanks for your speech, Mr. Forrest. Dr. Forrest, I should say. Back on the subject of nickel, despite your, the rationale you give as to why people should buy the ethically sourced nickel, there's clearly a problem in the short term, if not immediate term, with the nickel price and the Australian production, and the Australian government is looking at options, to sort of bridging options, one of which is a production tax credit. They haven't reached a final decision yet. Mike Henry from BHP said last week, BHP would much rather a better investment environment, industrial relations, lift some of those shackles off. Do you think a production tax credit is the way through this price crisis, this global price crisis, or is there something else you'd like to see from the government? The Prime Minister said it's got to be short, targeted and smart. What would you be doing?
Yeah, look, and I probably might want to address your question as well, even clearer. We've got to differentiate between dirty products like dirty nickel and green nickel. It's a little bit like the fossil fuel sector saying the only energy you're allowed to buy is ours. So customers have got to be able to make a choice. If you've got dirty nickel in your battery systems, then you want to know about that, because you don't want to propagate that. And you want the choice to buy clean nickel if you can. So the London Metal Exchange must differentiate between dirty and clean. They're two different products. They have two vastly different impacts. In terms of a production tax credit, I haven't looked at it closely enough. It seems to make a lot of sense. You're applying a tax credit on a profit you don't have yet. So, it seems a win-win for the Australian taxpayer, but I'd like to look at it further.
Thank you.
Next question is from Ben Westcott.
Ben Westcott from Bloomberg. Thank you so much for your speech, Mr. Forrest. You've given a very impassioned speech today about the need for quicker action to combat climate change. But Fortescue's capital expenditure plans show it's going to spend far more this year on metals than on clean energy projects. About 100% more, depending on how you sort of look at it. If the transition away from fossil fuels is so important, why not increase that spending on clean energy?
Yeah, that's really cool, mate. But we used to spend zero, and the fossil fuel sector and the mining industry spends about 0 too. So we're up to 50%. I'm really delighted to hear that stat. Thank you, because we were at 0, and we're going to keep on increasing. But we have said we are the green solutions company of the future. Now, we weren't the iron ore company of the future in 2003, right? We were the nothing. Now we are the iron ore company which changed the balance of power, which broke into the strongest protected cartel which has ever existed. We broke into that. So I see our future as continuing to be dynamic. We wish to be the green energy solutions company of the future. We're not there yet, right? But we're spending $6.2 billion just on metals to get there. So that'll mean green metals, it'll mean green energy, it'll mean green technology, and that's where we're going.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Next question is from Poppy Johnson.
Thank you so much for your speech. A carbon solutions levy clearly has its political challenges. Do you think the ground is more fertile for such an idea than it has been in the past?
Yeah, I think we just have to think it through. Small nuclear reactors sound like a really trendy thing. What a great idea. Let's just get them and plonk them everywhere until you know that it's way more expensive than green energy. When you know what the alternative is, you won't stick with the old. And so, yes.
Next question is from Paul Karp.
Thanks very much for your speech. In addition to the nuclear bull dust, David Littleproud has also suggested recently that rooftop solar could be a sufficient alternative to large-scale renewables and transmission infrastructure. Could I please ask, what do you think of the merits of that idea? And secondly, what does it do to investor certainty to have the alternative government proposing this and nuclear with no costed policy for either yet in sight?
Yeah, I think it's a little scary when you're getting ideas thrown at the Australian public which sound a bit trendy and cool, but are deliberately holding back. Now, this is not the first time I've challenged the Australian political scene to put the costs on the table. I've been doing it now for many, many months. They still haven't put the costs on the table. Why? Because they're going to blow up when they do. So, yes, I'd say I'd say we must back the alternative. What was the last half of your question?
Does it do anything for investor certainty to have the alternative government be proposing these policies without a costed policy yet?
Yeah. It's like my dad said, if you know you can fix the problem, then just get on with it. And so all the squabbling is coming at a very real cost to the Australian economy, the Australian voter, the Australian taxpayer. It's delaying it. It is the delays where the fossil fuel sector wins. If you can confuse an argument, like the tobacco sector confused the argument, will tobacco kill you or not? I mean, if it's confusing, they just win. We have to actually win the argument for us to win. So I'm saying very clearly, sticking with fossil fuels, doesn't matter if you're Liberal, Nationals, Labor, is a disaster for our country. Going green, Liberals, Labor, Nats, whoever you are, is wonderful for our country, economically, employment, everywhere.
Next question is from Kimberly Keynes.
Kimberly Keynes from the West Australian. Thank you so much for your speech. The Nightly is reporting today your oyster company in WA has been dumping tonnes of perfectly good seafood, especially oysters, in the tip. Could you please explain how dumping 12 tonnes of waste in a single month aligns with your commitment to sustainability? Or is there another explanation as to why the company is producing so much waste?
Okay, so that's a really great question. If I knew anything about it, I'd probably answer it. So no, that's all news to me. Be assured I'll be looking into it very hard, and if that's the truth, I will be doing something about it.
We have been told that this is what is happening, so...
You can keep hammering this. I don't know anything about it, but I have said I'm going to find out about it as soon as possible.
And are you able to come back to us then with
of course.
Explanation as to why?
I've never hidden from the media, so happy to rock and roll.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And just to confirm, is that one of your private companies?
Yes, yeah. Sustainable food is a really big issue inside the Harvest Road Group, so thank you.
Now, we've had a couple of questions about your businesses apart from Squadron Energy, including Fortescue. And given you're one of the biggest iron ore exporters from Australia, and given you have this message about green energy, kind of the obvious question is, when do you think green steel is feasible in Australia? Do you have to have a carbon levy to make it affordable? Do you have to have tariffs from Europe to actually make it cost effective? Because it basically comes down to a question of, are you expecting massive subsidies from the federal government and federal taxpayers to make green steel happen? Or do you think green steel will happen on its own, and if so, when?
Look, I can't change the reality. There are already carbon taxes locking in against Australia. So it doesn't matter what I think, they're happening right now. Do I think that green steel is on the horizon? Only with policy settings to match. If you want to deeply discount fossil fuel and provide no support to green energy, don't repeat Einstein's obvious observation that wishing for a different future, doing it the same way defines insanity. So yes, we're going to have to change things. We're going to have to change our policy settings. But can I just say this? There are technologies which Fortescue spent a fortune on championing, which are bringing down the cost of hydrogen, which are bringing down the cost of making green iron. And I'm very excited about them.
But that's not... OK, so I'm interested in a time frame here, because the great hope for renewable energy is that you won't need to ship iron ore to China to have it turned into steel with the use of coal, that it is possible one day to produce that green steel in Australia with renewable energy. Now, is that pie in the sky?
No.
Or is that actually...
Hang on. Look, we're already doing it, OK? So we're already making green iron. Let me put that straight out there. We've been producing green hydrogen for some time. We just approved a project, which was part of our 3 projects approved to go from green hydrogen to green iron, up at Christmas Creek, a very large iron ore operation. It is our ambition to turn our entire iron ore production to green iron ore, and then it's a smaller step to go from there to green iron. And we're aiming at it.
The next question.
We're not the egg being laid by a chook walking past the pan, right? We're the bacon in the pan, David. We're doing it.
I'm not sure what that analogy really means, but...
Well, it just means that I'm not observing this and worrying about it. I'm actually doing it.
Okay. Next question is from James Riley.
Thanks, Dr Forrest. I'm James Riley from Innovation Oz. I wanted to ask you about the Inflation Reduction Act as a driver of industrial development and bringing manufacturing back home in the US. The Australian government hasn't formally responded to that massive subsidy program. I wonder if you can sort of talk through what it would take, referencing your Phoenix Hydrogen Hub, that liquid green hydrogen project in the US. Were that to come, something like that to come onshore in Australia, what very specifically would you need to see from government by way of underpinning?
Okay, so the US government's been pretty crafty here, and many governments around the world have missed it. They call it a subsidy, they call it an imposition on taxpayers, etc. They completely miss it. What they're doing is putting a tax credit on an industry which doesn't exist, on a profit which hasn't been made, which they want to get into existence as soon as possible. In other words, it's kind of future monopoly money. It'll get paid when the industry is brought into existence, when the profit is actually made, when the tax gets paid. But none of that exists now. So it's an industry which is paying, which is new industry, which they've got to have, which is basically paying for itself into existence with the carrot of a tax credit. So I see that for what it is, a vast investment multiplier, an economic engine. Doesn't really matter what I see or think. What I know is happening now in North America is this stonking great economic engine called the IRA is bringing in investment at a rate which the United States has not seen for decades, turning itself into a new green energy engine. Is that great policy? I think it's great policy. It's not a subsidy, it's an economic engine.
So, sorry, if I can just follow up. The Australian government has said it can't go toe-to-toe, dollar for dollar, with the US, obviously, at that scale. So where would you specifically target their thinking?
I'd go for really specifically what I'm talking about, which is a green hydrogen tax credit on an industry which doesn't exist, on a profit that hasn't been made. You're going to give a credit back. It's really clever policy.
Okay, so what's wrong with the Hydrogen Head Start program that the government did a year ago in the budget? That's $2 billion. I mean, it's pretty much a direct subsidy from taxpayers, right? What's wrong with that model?
Yeah, I'm not knocking it at all. It's
insufficient then, in your view?
No, I think it's a very good policy, but I would also say that the $3 tax credit being paid on a profit that doesn't exist in an industry that doesn't exist is a really clever policy.
Next
Not either or, okay?
Next question is from Nick Stewart.
Nor does it have to be. Two truths can exist.
You began with an understandable left hook on the politicians that supposedly represent regional communities but are not actually acting, you say, in their interests. On the other hand, you've let the government off a bit. You haven't come up with the right uppercut. I was wondering, with this CSL that you're behind...
Okay. I hate acronyms because I've only just flown in this morning from Morocco, so...
OK. Well, do you want to see... I mean, at the moment, the government hasn't... You've said that the government needs to act. Are you going to give it a date? Do you want to say by the next election we must see a clear plan to get a carbon levy in place so that we know that there is a difference between the two main political parties?
So Rodan Ross said straight up, this is going to be politically unacceptable, this will probably get canned immediately, but generally the conversation's going to get started. I'm proving that out. The conversation must get started. It's actually really good policy. We're not used to it. It's new. It'll drive enormous change called benefit to regional Australia and to our economy. Let's just socialise this. Let's get this into the mainstream conversation now. It's really good policy. It's new policy. Politicians, so don't be scared of it. Just know that there is no improvement without change.
So is it time for the politicians to actually commit to not just say, oh, yeah, it's a great idea, we'll need to think about it, but to actually, by the next election, would you like the politicians to say, right, this is our policy?
Look, I'd like it before dinner time this evening, mate. So I think by the next election is fine by me. Okay.
Our next question is from Eloise Fowler. Is it not? Our next question is from Andrew
Lucky
Forrest.
me, Dr.
Oh, let me off lightly. Come on, Andrew.
Dr. Forrest, you've come back from Morocco, but before that, Gabon, before that, Munich, right? You were, in effect, a de facto Australian government emissary. I think there was Kevin Rudd there and James Patterson. But when the topic of Ukraine came up, what was the sense that you got from the world leaders and the business leaders that you were mixing with? Do you fear that there is a waning of commitment because of distraction, perhaps, in the Middle East?
Yeah, look, I saw clarity and complete unity across the world to stop a despotic regime rubbishing the rules-based order and invading a country because they want to use hate, not love, to get their way. There is a weak spot here, which is, I think, more a talking point, more something to create attention at the ballot box to people who haven't made up their mind, and that is where the Republicans sit on this. And I'd just say to every single Republican, you're worrying about China, you're worrying about your influence in Asia-Pacific, you're worrying about all of these. Well, you're not going to have it both ways, mate. You're not going to be seen to be supporting a despot taking over a country by force. Same thing could happen to Australia if you're going to do that. Right? If you're going to allow Putin to invade a country, if you're going to in any way be seen to be supporting Putin invade another country, then you might allow it for Australia too. We are your key to the Asia-Pacific. We are your #1 ally in the world, certainly the most important for you in our region. And if you think that's going to pass the pub test in Australia, think again.
So what's your message to the Trump camp, given what your message there about Putin?
I'm just saying congratulations on creating so much noise. I understand why you'd say that you'll let anyone invade a NATO country who's not putting up their 2% for a defence budget. All the NATO countries get up in arms, but none of them vote in North America. Good politics. But when it matters, then remember that you are the country who fought despots for decades. You are the country who has been the proponent of the rule of law, and you are the country who relies on your allies around the world. And don't think allies are just going to roll over if you back a despot. Won't happen. Doesn't matter what the political apparatus says or the security apparatus says, the Australian voter who goes down the pub and just looks at the pub test, has a yarn about it, said, nah, mate, we don't cop that. And governments will change.
Our next question is from Rosie Lewis.
Dr Forrest, what do you say to the coalition as they think about whether to introduce a 2035 emissions reduction target? Is it a problem if there's no target at all from the alternative government? Is it a problem if that target does include nuclear in 2035 or 2040?
It's a massive problem if we don't have a line in the sand. Okay, I mean, if you think you're going to create something without creating a target or creating a line in the sand for your country to work towards or your company to work towards, then you've clearly not ever run a country or a company or implemented a successful project. You know nothing about project implementation if you think you're going to achieve something without a target. So just say that. And if it includes nuclear, then look, I'd just say you obviously got an electorate who's happy to pay way more than they need to for a fundamental cost of living being energy.
Just to follow up on that then, there is a debate about the 2035 target. We currently have a government target of 43% by 2030. Given the way you see renewables, how much more ambitious do you think Australia can be on a 2035 target?
All I can say is that the companies who have set strong targets have had the strongest economic growth. Okay, those companies who have had very weak targets and wishy-washy have had low economic growth. What I am seeing is that China is investing approximately twice the amount of money than the rest of the world combined on renewable energy. When I challenged China to keep that ramping up to 500 gigawatts of renewable energy a year, so by the 2030s they could actually go green, their leaders say, yes, we're thinking about it. I think we should be adjusting our targets and investing heavily in the renewable energy sector as well.
Will we hit 43% by 2030?
43% by 2030?
Emission reduction? That's the government target.
I think if we continue delaying, obfuscating, bringing up talking points instead of policy to save our country, no. That's the risk when I've said there's a real risk, a real cost to every Australian through all this squabbling and bickering and not just getting on with the truth. That will be the cost.
Last question is from Phil Curry.
Thanks, Dave. Again, hi again, Dr Forrest. Back to, look, there's a real possibility, so let me start it this way. In the last 3 or 4 years, we've seen a big rush towards renewables driven by the IRA, by the Biden administration, introduction of the IRA and all the competition that's created. There's a real possibility Trump's going to be president again this time next year of the United States. Does that worry you, given his track record on renewables and fossil fuels, that global momentum may stall if the IRA hits the fence, or what do you think?
It's a really good question, but I think we've got to go back to the animal itself. Okay, it's a businessman. Okay, and it really understands business. It's the Republican Party and not just Donald Trump. So when I hear a business person talking against the greatest economic engine they've seen in decades, then I'd be really surprised, okay? What I know for sure that once you're in power, what got you into power may not be so important. I would be amazed if anyone, Republican or other, put a stop to massive energy and foreign investment into a country, because it's your lifeblood.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've covered a lot of ground there. It sounds like we'll be hearing more from you about Ukraine imminently. I want to thank you for being here. I also want to let you know that we have a membership card from the National Press Club, because after this address you will be welcome back at any point. Please join me in thanking Andrew Forrest.